Today we're going to talk about how to set up a printer that prints money from your basement. Nah, just kidding, that's illegal. But we're going to talk about the next best thing, the legal money printer, dividends. How can I leverage dividends to make passive income? Hey everyone, WhyLearn here, and today for Why Learn Wednesday, we're getting back into the finance world and we're going to talk about dividend investing, the basics of it, and how you can use dividends to make a little bit extra money on the side. It took me some time to build, but I now have a dividend portfolio that generates me about $570 a month on average, and this is money for actually doing nothing. Doesn't matter if I work hard that month or if I completely slack off. Over the course of the year, I will get around $570 per month, more or less, no matter what happens. And I want this number to keep growing. I really like dividends because they're very hands-off compared to something like real estate. And once you put in the work of getting the money to buy the dividend-paying stock, you just sit back and collect the money. And if you hit a home run and get a few nice dividend stocks that appreciate and continue to pay, it's literally like having a money printer in the basement that's just printing around the clock no matter what you're doing. This is my favorite type of passive income. However, it wasn't so passive. It took me about 8 years to build, and this is not a get-rich-quick scheme, and in fact, it's really the opposite. So it's not easy, but it makes your life easier later. I can't live off of this amount of money, but it's a nice complement to my other income streams. So how can one build an income stream like this for yourself? Let's get into it. Just a disclaimer too, this is not professional financial advice, just something I did that worked for me, and it may not work for everyone. So first of all, let's get into the quick question from the viewer that brings up an interesting point about dividends, then I'm going to dive into it. So here's the question. Hi WhyLearn, huge fan of your channel, appreciate the advice you give. I binged your videos and found a lot of it useful. Thanks man, thanks for supporting the channel. I noticed you've talked a lot about dividend income, and I was hoping you could talk more about that. I have a lot of money in ETFs that get quarterly dividends, but they don't add up to much. I'm wondering if there's certain things to look for when buying a stock for the intention of dividend revenue, if it's simply a matter of volume. Any advice greatly appreciated. So thanks for the question, Dan. I didn't dox you because there's probably like a million Dans in the world, but you bring up a good point that dividends don't add up to much, but I'll be addressing that throughout this video because it is a matter of volume and being in the game for a long time to maximize the amount of dividends you get. And although it does start off small, you'll find that it could grow to be big time later on. So let me give a personal example of one instance where I've succeeded using dividends. So here's a personal example of where I bought a stock and this really worked out in my favor, turning about $5,000 into $30,000 to show you the power of dividend investing and how this can make a huge difference for you. Like this was really one of my home runs. So in March of 2020, as we all know, the stock market was cooked, everything down like 30%, and people really thought the world could be ending. There was red everywhere in the stock market and opportunities to buy stocks at steep discounts. And so I saw a strong company, Blackstone, ticker BX, and although, yes, they're controversial now, much more controversial now than they were back then, they were a financially strong company. And so I bought in for about $36 a share in March for around $5,000 total. Then I just waited. And as of this writing, BX is now at about $180 per share, which and I've over 6x'd my money because the stock went up 5 times, plus my dividend payments this entire time. And not only that, but they've raised their dividend quite a bit in the meantime. So last year I made $600 the whole year just with Blackstone dividends. You know, you take the dividend yield is around 2%. I have about 30,000 of this stock now. That's about $600 per year. Not only that, but here's the interesting part. I make 12% per year on my original investment of $5,000 plus the appreciation of the stock. Now I have $30,000 paying me per year. So this is a cheat code, and it can literally happen with the right mix of research and luck and consistently investing, especially during downturns. I mean, if I even get a few more home runs like this, it'll just set me up for life. So dividends has forced me to take a long-term view because why would I sell this asset? Because it's paying me solid money, it's worth a lot, and if I sold, I just have to pay taxes on the large gains. So this is kind of like me thinking of it as locking up an income stream. So next, let's get into the basics of dividend investing. So for this video, this will be mainly just dividends and dividend investing. If you want my overall deep dive on general investing, I'll link that below as well because I had a pretty solid video on that. So first, let's define what a dividend is. A dividend is a distribution of earnings, often quarterly, by a company to its shareholders in the form of cash or stock reinvestment. So essentially, you own stock in a company, something that you purchase through a broker like Schwab, Ameritrade, E-Trade, Robinhood, or something like that. And then they make revenue or they make a profit, and they give you a small part of that and pay you out. So you're now the shareholder, and they're working for you. Usually, the dividends are paid quarterly, semi-annually, or in some cases, I'd say much less common, one time a year. Now, a stock has a dividend yield. So let's take a look at McDonald's, for example. We got $280 per share, and the dividend yield is about 2.5%. So if you multiply 280 times 2.5%, that's what you can expect to make per year by by holding that share of McDonald's stock, more or less. The dividend yield is just the dividend per share divided by the current share price. So if a stock's $100 and the dividend yield is 3%, you can expect to be paid out around $3 per year or less. So it doesn't sound like much, but at the end of the day, if you buy these stocks, they pay you just for owning them, just for being an investor and supporter in the company. $3 out of 100, yeah, like that doesn't sound very exciting, but stick with me here because the power of growth and compound interest, it can make a big difference in the long term. So why is dividend investing so powerful? I'm going to give you a couple of charts. First of all, the S&P 500, the main index fund for the United States stock market, 75% of these returns have come from dividends in the last 40 or so years. And without dividend reinvestment, constantly taking the dividend payments and putting it back into the overall S&P 500, you'd have a lot less of a gain than you would otherwise. So dividend income is also much more stable than the overall stock market. So if you take a look at this chart, which is the S&P 500 dividend growth, which means the dividends the S&P gives off, it's only declined about 3 times in this 35-year span, which is incredible. And in fact, it grows usually at like 6.5% per year on average. So the income you make from dividends is also growing on top of these stocks that are growing. Another thing that makes dividend investing powerful is that you can enroll in a DRIP program or dividend reinvestment program, which means that as you're paid these dividends, it automatically just goes back into buying the stock. This gives you steady income and enforces dollar cost averaging, which is good for good times, good for bad times, because your portfolio is going to bounce back faster if you're always pouring money into it. This is also a powerful retirement strategy, as many older people use dividend-paying stocks that are stable as an extra income stream. Companies that pay dividends are usually more stable than ones who don't on average because you need to be stable in order to sustain paying out a few percentage points of profit to shareholders. Dividends can also have various tax benefits. Like for example, some companies will pay out qualified dividends which are taxed at a lower rate than ordinary income. So now let's talk about dividends versus real estate as passive income. So real estate's another great way that many people make passive income, but I like dividends better for a couple reasons. First, I'll say if you hit a home run on a property, it will probably outperform dividends because the value of the home goes up and maybe you're renting it out and you have good tenant. But it is riskier because many things can go wrong. You could get a bad tenant. For example, one of my buddies had a property and had an awful tenant, and the tenant actually got mad at him one day when he wanted to collect his rent, and he actually lit his garage on fire. So that's not very good. But with dividends, it's not super risky. It's still risky because it's the stock market, but you have no overhead, you have no tenants. You simply put in the work to get the money, and you sit back and watch. Now let's talk about how I built my portfolio and just how to get started. So in my early 20s, I opened a few accounts and made dividends from 3 different places. One of them was an individual taxable account, a Roth IRA, and a 401k. And this is just a combo of Vanguard, Schwab, E-Trade, Ameritrade, and you go into one of these platforms and then you look for stocks that usually tells you the dividend yield right there. For me, I don't chase high yields. I kind of like in the 2 to 4% range because if companies are giving away too much money, there's no room for growth. And you can look up dividend players for yourself and just try investing in a few. There's a group of companies known as the Dividend Aristocrats, which is stocks that have been stable and growing their dividends consistently over decades of time, as well as Vanguard funds that focus on dividends like VYM, VYG, and then a Schwab one I like is also SCHD. So I won't get too into it, but obviously, as you know, I've said many times, I was cheap, I had a good salary, and I consistently invested more and more over time into these safe companies. And a lot of these index funds that pay dividends are safe and stable companies that are growing strong. And as my portfolio was growing, so was my dividend income. So what I like about my dividends is it forced me into a long-term view. So you don't get paid dividends by constantly buying and selling and trading. You get paid dividends for just being a long-term investor. So if I were you and I wanted to get started into this, I would open one of these accounts and then, just dip your toes in the water. Buy a couple of dividend-paying stocks that are strong and show track records of success, and just watch the dividends pour in quarterly or semi-annually, and then add more as you see fit. So usually these companies, they'll pay out quarterly, and they'll announce their dividend and the date it's paid, and then you get the dividend and decide whether or not to keep or reinvest it. So dividends are never my entire portfolio, but just another piece of my overall strategy. And it's one of my biggest and one of my favorite because it does force me to be a patient investor. And I did start very small. So think of if you only have maybe $5,000 and you want to invest in a stock with a 3% yield. That's about $150 a year or a little over $11 per month. But if you keep growing and the market keeps going up, all of a sudden you'll have $50,000 paying you $1,500 a year. And then that's over $100 a month. That's a little more significant. And then when you get into the hundreds of thousands of dollars of a portfolio, you're talking about potentially thousands of dollars per month in dividends. And remember the investment chart. Even small amounts add up to lots over time. So if you can find a way to even get $100 per month in dividend income, it could work out very well for you. I know that's the main critique, is that dividends usually start small, but you need to have the small numbers to get to the bigger numbers at the end of the day. I started very small, but it slowly grew over time. And last year I made around $7,000 in the year on dividends. And so dividends do fluctuate. I had some good months, some bad months. My best month was around $1,100, and my lowest month in dividends was about $350. So it does fluctuate a lot, but at the end of the day, I found it to be pretty consistently around the mid 500s to closer to $600 per month. And if I stay on this path, I can eventually get to multiple $1,000s per month. And I think my goal would be $4,000 a month in dividends, which would, given my normal expenses, just make me job optional, barring any setbacks for the rest of my life. So this is the power of dividends, just little bits adding up to a lot over time. Now, dividends come with a lot of critiques. There's a lot of investors and very, very good investors who don't like dividends. So let's get into some of the common critiques. Number one is dividends can be cut. So just like anything else, stocks can go down. During bad times, companies will often need the extra money, and they'll stop paying shareholders by reducing the dividend. But this is usually temporary. So dividends can be cut and go down just like anything else. But as the chart I've showed you, that doesn't happen very often. So there's less risk with dividends than a lot of other investments like growth stocks, which means there's less upside. So you certainly won't get rich quick doing this. Dividend companies often don't have as aggressive of swings as growth stocks, which is good and bad. A company like Amazon, they're famous for not paying dividends, and they prefer growth. They prefer to reinvest their profits into the company as opposed to paying shareholders, which helps with research and things like that. So that's a valid argument. Another thing to consider is dividends do get taxed. So when you take a growth stock that's not paying you dividends, you don't pay taxes until you sell it. But with a dividend stock, you do have to pay taxes every year on that. So that's something to consider as well, and a critique. So in conclusion, it's not easy to get there, but over time, your dividends can grow into a large amount and give you monthly income along the way. And this is just my story with it. Eventually, I was able to get to a good amount of money per month, and I've had some successes, and it's definitely one of my most reliable income sources. So hope you found this useful. Let me know what you think in the comments. And as always, send me an email to be featured on a future episode. Peace out, everyone.